What happens when the system designed to protect you becomes your worst nightmare? For 17-year-old Maya Washington, a minor traffic stop in a wealthy Virginia suburb spirals into a waking horror. An ambitious judge with his eyes on a bigger prize decides to make an example of her. He sees an easy target, another statistic. He smirks from his bench, assured of his absolute power, ready to railroad an innocent black teen straight into a prison cell. He makes one fatal miscalculation. He allows her one phone call. He never imagined the man on the other end of that line was not just her father, but the most powerful law enforcement officer in the entire country. Stay tuned to hear how one phone call brought a corrupt empire crashing down. The air in Fairfax County, Virginia, carried the sweet, heavy scent of late summer magnolias on the evening it all went wrong. For Maya Washington, the smell would forever be tainted with the metallic tang of fear. She was driving her mother's meticulously maintained 2019 Toyota Camry, the last gift her mom had given her before succumbing to cancer 2 years prior. The car was more than just a mode of transport. It was a sanctuary, a rolling memorial filled with the faint scent of her mother's lavender air freshener and the lingering warmth of her memory. Maya was humming along to a playlist she'd curated for her upcoming drive to Washington, D.C., where she was set to begin her freshman year at Georgetown University in just 3 weeks. A full scholarship. The acceptance letter was still taped to the refrigerator back home in their quiet D.C. neighborhood. A proud banner of her achievement. Her father, Robert Washington, had beamed with a pride so intense it seemed to light up the entire house. He'd hugged her, his large frame enveloping her, and whispered, "Your mother would be so proud, Maya." She was returning from her friend Jessica's house, where they'd spent the afternoon poring over dorm room decor websites and packing lists. It was a route she'd driven a dozen times, a straight shot down a well-lit, 4-lane road lined with stately brick homes and perfectly manicured lawns. She was doing everything right, hands at 10 and 2, speed exactly 45 miles per hour in the 45 zone, blinker on 100 feet before her turn. She was the daughter of a man who lived and breathed the law. Cutting corners wasn't in her DNA. That's why the sudden explosion of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror was so disorienting. It was like a glitch in the matrix. Her heart gave a nervous little flutter. What did I do? She checked her speedometer again. 45. Her seatbelt was on. Her headlights were on. Following the protocol her dad had drilled into her since she'd gotten her learner's permit, she signaled, pulled over smoothly to the curb, and killed the engine. She rolled down her window, placed her hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen, and waited. The officer who approached her window was a man whose features seemed chiseled from impatience. His name tag read Miller. He was tall, with a stiff posture that suggested a military background, and his eyes scanned the interior of the Camry with a predatory slowness. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any preamble or courtesy. "Of course, officer." Maya's voice was steady, though her palms had begun to sweat. She reached slowly into the glove compartment, retrieved the registration and insurance card, and handed them over with her driver's license. Officer Miller took them without a word, his flashlight beam dancing over the documents before sweeping across her face, then into the back seat where her Georgetown acceptance packet lay on the seat. He lingered on it for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Do you know why I pulled you over, ma'am?" he asked, the ma'am sounding less like a sign of respect and more like a sarcastic barb. "No, officer, I don't," Maya said honestly. "I was driving the speed limit and—" "You drifted over the center line back there?" He cut her off. 3 times. A knot of confusion and indignation tightened in Maya's stomach. "No, I didn't. I was right in the middle of the lane." A faint smirk touched Miller's lips. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No, sir," she said quickly, remembering her dad's warnings. "Be polite. Be respectful. Don't argue." "I'm just certain I didn't." "We'll see about that. Stay in the car." He walked back to his patrol vehicle, leaving Maya in a state of suspended anxiety. The minutes stretched into an eternity. She could see him in his car, talking on his radio. What was taking so long? It was a simple traffic stop, unless it wasn't. A cold dread, an old and familiar fear she'd been taught about her whole life, but had been privileged enough to rarely experience, began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a center line. When Officer Miller returned, his demeanor had shifted from impatient to aggressive. He was accompanied by a second officer now, a burly, silent man who stood back by the Camry's trunk. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," Miller commanded. "Step out? Why?" Maya's voice trembled slightly. "We have reason to believe there may be illegal substances in your car. Step out now." Her mind reeled. Substances? "There's nothing in my car. I don't do drugs. You can't just—" "Out! Now!" he barked, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his holstered pistol. Panic, sharp and blinding, seized her. Tears pricked at her eyes as she fumbled with the door handle and stepped onto the pavement. The second officer immediately began a search of her car, his movements rough and invasive. He tore through the glove compartment, tossed the contents of the center console onto the passenger seat, and ripped up the floor mats. "You have no right to do this," Maya cried out, a mixture of fear and outrage making her voice shrill. "I have every right," Miller sneered, his face inches from hers. "Your vehicle matches the description of one involved in a narcotics transaction reported in this area 10 minutes ago. A black Toyota Camry." "There are thousands of black Camrys in Virginia," she protested, the injustice of it all choking her. "This is my mom's car." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Miller said, his voice dripping with condescending disbelief. It was then that the second officer from the passenger side called out, "Hey, Miller, got something." Maya's blood ran cold. She watched in horror as he emerged from the car holding a small, clear plastic baggie containing a few white pills. He held it up with a theatrical flair, as if he'd just unearthed a priceless artifact. "What is that?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before." "That's what they all say," Miller said, the smirk returning to his face, wider and more triumphant this time. "Looks like your college plans are about to change." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as they snapped around her wrist was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of her future shattering. "No! You planted that! I swear that's not mine!" she screamed, struggling against his grip. The tears she'd been holding back now flowed freely, hot tracks of shame and terror on her cheeks. "Tell it to the judge," Miller said coldly, shoving her toward the back of his patrol car. As he pushed her head down to get into the vehicle, her eyes caught one last glimpse of her mother's car, its door hanging open like a wound. The Georgetown packet scattered on the pavement. The sweet smell of magnolias was gone, replaced by the acrid stench of a nightmare made real. The Fairfax County Adult Detention Center was a monument to institutional beige and despair. The air was thick with the smell of industrial cleaner, sweat, and hopelessness. Maya was stripped of her possessions, her phone, her wallet, the silver locket with her mother's picture inside. She was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell with concrete walls that seemed to leach the warmth from her body. The hours bled into one another. She replayed the traffic stop 1,000 times, searching for a misstep, a reason, but found only the chilling randomness of it all. The officer's sneer, the impossible appearance of the baggie, it was a setup, a blatant, cruel frame job. But why? Why her? The next morning, she was shackled at the wrists and ankles and led with a handful of other detainees through a series of sterile corridors to the courthouse. The clinking of their chains was a dismal chorus. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the scuffed toes of her sneakers, unable to bear the curious or contemptuous stares of court employees. She was assigned a public defender, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was in her late 30s, with weary eyes and a stack of manila folders that seemed permanently attached to her hip. She pulled Maya into a small windowless conference room for a hurried 5-minute consultation. "Maya Washington?" she said, flipping open a folder. 17. Possession of a controlled substance. Schedule 2. Looks like Percocet. That's a Class 5 felony in Virginia. Potential 1 to 10 years in prison. The words hit Maya like physical blows. Prison? But I didn't do it. The officer, he put it there. I swear. Sarah Jenkins gave a long, tired sigh, a sound that suggested she'd heard this exact story countless times. Maya, I believe you, but right now, What I believe doesn't matter. What a judge believes, what a jury believes. That's what matters. Officer Miller's report is very thorough. He states you were driving erratically and that he found the pills in plain view in your center console. That's a lie. He tore the car apart to find them. It's his word against yours, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. And he's a decorated police officer. You're a black teenager in a county that prides itself on being tough on crime. She leaned in closer. The prosecutor is offering a deal. Plead guilty and they'll reduce it to a misdemeanor. You'll get probation, community service, maybe some drug counseling. You'll have a record, but you won't go to prison. It's the best deal you're going to get. Maya stared at her, horrified. Plead guilty to something I didn't do? It would ruin my life, my scholarship. I'm supposed to go to Georgetown in 3 weeks. A misdemeanor record might complicate that, Sarah admitted, but a felony conviction will make it impossible. Maya, you need to think realistically about the system you're in. No, Maya said, a hard knot of defiance forming in her gut. Her dad had always taught her to stand up for the truth, no matter how hard it was. I'm not pleading guilty. I'm innocent. Sarah's shoulders slumped. Okay, then we plead not guilty at the arraignment and request bail. Just be prepared. Judge Harrington is on the bench today. He's not known for his leniency. The courtroom was imposing, all dark wood and high ceilings, designed to make anyone who entered feel small and insignificant. At the front, on a raised dais, sat Judge Arthur Harrington. He was a man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair, a ruddy complexion, and the easy, arrogant posture of someone born into wealth and power. He was a pillar of the Fairfax community, a vocal proponent of law and order, and as Maya would soon discover, a man with a deep-seated prejudice he barely bothered to conceal. When Maya's case was called, she stood beside Sarah Jenkins, her knees trembling. Judge Harrington peered down at her over his spectacles, his lips curled into a faint, dismissive frown. Maya Washington, he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Possession of narcotics. What does the defendant plead? Not guilty, Your Honor, Sarah said clearly. The judge chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. Not guilty, of course. We'll move to the matter of bail. The Commonwealth? The prosecutor, a slick young man in an expensive suit, stood up. Your Honor, given the serious nature of the charge, trafficking adjacent narcotics in a school zone, and the defendant's lack of ties to this community, the Commonwealth requests that bail be denied. She is a flight risk. Lack of ties? Sarah interjected, incredulous. Your Honor, Miss Washington is a lifelong resident of the D.C. area, just across the river. She is a model student, an incoming freshman at Georgetown University on a full academic scholarship. She has no criminal record. She is the very definition of not a flight risk. We ask for her to be released on her own recognizance. Judge Harrington leaned forward, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He seemed to relish this moment. Georgetown, you say? It seems Miss Washington was more interested in extracurricular pharmacology than political science. A few sycophantic chuckles rippled through the prosecution side of the courtroom. A scholarship doesn't make you immune to the law, counselor. In fact, it's a tragic example of wasted potential. Another one lost to the allure of the streets. Maya felt a surge of heat in her face. He was talking about her as if she were a cliché, a stereotype he'd conjured in his own mind. He hadn't even looked at her file, at the letters of recommendation, at the proof of her entire life's hard work. He saw her skin color in the charge, and that was all he needed. Your Honor, this is, Sarah began, but the judge cut her off with a sharp rap of his gavel. The defendant's supposed ties to an out-of-state university are irrelevant. She was arrested in my county, and she will be tried in my county. The argument that she is a flight risk has merit. However, I am a reasonable man. He stroked his chin, performing a pantomime of deep consideration. Bail is set at $250,000. A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. Sarah Jenkins's jaw dropped. $250,000? Your Honor, that is exorbitant and punitive. It's tantamount to no bail at all for a girl in her circumstances. The bail schedule for a first-time nonviolent offense like this is, I set the bail, Ms. Jenkins, not a schedule. Harrington snapped, his genial mask slipping to reveal the raw power beneath. If the defendant can't make it, then she can await her trial in a place where she can't cause any more trouble for the good people of Fairfax County. Next case. The gavel banged again, a sound of finality. Two bailiffs moved toward Maya. The world tilted on its axis. $250,000. It was an impossible number, a king's ransom. It was a prison sentence before a trial had even begun. Tears streamed down her face as the bailiffs took her arms. "No," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please, I need to make a phone call. I have a right to a phone call. I need to call my dad." Judge Harrington looked down from his perch, a cruel, satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Oh, by all means," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let the girl call her daddy. I'm sure he'll be very disappointed in you. Take her away." As they led her out of the courtroom, his mocking laughter seemed to follow her, echoing in the hallway, a sound of pure, unchecked malice. He had won. He had crushed her. He had no idea who was about to answer that phone call. The processing area for outgoing calls was even more grim than the holding cell. It was a small cinder block room with a single, battered metal phone bolted to the wall, its cord reinforced with steel. The air was stale, and the weight of all the desperate, whispered conversations that had taken place there seemed to press down on Maya. A guard stood by the door, arms crossed, face a mask of utter boredom. "One call," the guard grunted. 5 minutes. Collect." Maya's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the receiver. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and punched in the number she knew better than her own. Her father's private cell phone. He'd made her memorize it when she was 10. "For emergencies only, sweet pea," he'd said. This, she thought with a surge of grim irony, certainly qualified. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, his voice came through, warm and familiar, a sound that brought a fresh wave of tears to her eyes. "This is Robert." "Dad?" Maya's voice was a choked whisper. The immediate shift in his tone was palpable. The professional warmth vanished, replaced by pure paternal concern. "Maya, what's wrong? You sound... Where are you?" "Dad, I'm in jail," she sobbed, the words tumbling out. "In Fairfax. They arrested me last night. They said I had drugs, but I didn't, Dad, I swear. Someone put them in the car. And the judge, he set bail at $250,000. I don't know what to do." For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. It was a dense, heavy silence, the kind that feels like a coiled spring. Maya could picture him perfectly, sitting in his vast, mahogany-paneled office on the 5th floor of the Robert F. Kennedy Department of Justice building. His back ramrod straight, his jaw tightening, the vast machinery of his mind processing every terrible word she'd just said. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously calm. It was the voice he used when he was about to dismantle a hostile witness in court or dress down a subordinate who had failed him. It was a voice that promised methodical, overwhelming force. "Maya, listen to me very carefully," he said, his words precise and deliberate. "Tell me the name of the judge." "Harrington," she sniffled. "Judge Arthur Harrington." "And your public defender?" "Sarah Jenkins." She tried to help, but he wouldn't listen. "Okay, sweet pea. I need you to be strong for me. Do not talk to anyone else. Do not sign anything. Do you understand?" "Yes, Dad." "I'm going to hang up now. Help is on the way. I love you." "I love you too, Dad." The line went dead. Maya stood there for a moment, the heavy receiver still pressed to her ear, a tiny seed of hope planting itself in the barren soil of her despair. She hung up the phone and turned to find the guard looking at her with a flicker of curiosity. She was led back to her cell. Time seemed to warp, slowing and stretching. Every distant clang of a metal door, every shout down the hall made her jump. An hour passed, then another. The fragile hope began to wither. Had her dad been able to do anything? Was he just a dad? A successful lawyer, yes. But what could one lawyer do against a corrupt judge in another jurisdiction? Meanwhile, back in the Fairfax County Courthouse, Sarah Jenkins was packing her worn leather briefcase, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The Harrington verdict had been a gut punch, She'd seen biased judges before, but the open contempt, the punitive, astronomical bail for a kid like Maya, it felt personal. It felt like a declaration of war on decency itself. She was just about to head out the door when the court clerk, a harried woman named Brenda, scurried over to her. "Sarah, you're not going to believe this," Brenda whispered, her eyes wide. "Judge Harrington just got a call in his chambers. I was dropping off the afternoon docket. He turned white as a sheet. I mean, ghost white." Sarah frowned. "A call from who?" "I don't know." But 5 minutes later, Benjamin Carter's office called the clerk's office directly. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Benjamin Carter was not just any lawyer. He was the lawyer, a former U.S. Solicitor General, now the senior partner at Carter, Shaw and Gable, the most prestigious and feared law firm in Washington, D.C. They handled billion-dollar corporate mergers and landmark Supreme Court cases. They didn't do county-level possession charges. Benjamin Carter? For what? Sarah asked, her mind racing. He said he's now the lead counsel for a Miss Maya Washington and is dispatching a team to the courthouse immediately. He's filing a motion for an emergency bail hearing this afternoon, citing judicial misconduct and excessive bail. And he said to inform Judge Harrington that the motion has been copied to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Sarah felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. This was like using a nuclear bomb to kill a fly. What on earth was going on? How could Maya Washington, a girl who qualified for a public defender, afford Benjamin Carter? At that moment, Judge Harrington burst out of his chambers. The ruddy, confident complexion was gone, replaced by a pasty, sweating pallor. His silver hair seemed disheveled, and his eyes darted around the hallway like a cornered animal. He saw Sarah and strode towards her, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Miss Jenkins!" he boomed, trying to project his usual authority, but his voice was strained. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding your client, Miss Washington." Sarah stood her ground, a strange, exhilarating sense of power beginning to bloom in her chest. "Oh, I thought your ruling was quite clear, Your Honor." "Hasty," Harrington corrected, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "Perhaps a bit hasty. In reviewing the preliminary file, I may have overlooked certain character-affirming details. Her academic record, for instance. I've decided, in the interest of justice, to reconsider the bail amount." Sarah allowed herself a small, sharp smile. "You've already had a call from Mr. Carter's office, then?" Harrington flinched as if she'd struck him. "Yes, a professional courtesy. Look, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. Bring your client back to my courtroom. I'll grant her release on her own recognizance. No bail. We'll chalk it up to an administrative error." "An administrative error that you set at $250,000? Sarah asked, her voice laced with ice. She was enjoying this far too much. "And what about the charges?" "The charges stand for now," the judge said dismissively, eager to end the conversation. "That's a matter for the prosecutor." But the bravado was gone. He was scrambling. "I see," Sarah said slowly. Then the puzzle pieces in her head began to click together. Benjamin Carter, the Department of Justice, the sheer, overwhelming force being brought to bear. And then she remembered what Maya had said as they dragged her from the courtroom. "I need to call my dad." She looked Judge Harrington dead in the eye. "Judge," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "who is Maya Washington's father?" Judge Harrington's face, if possible, grew even paler. He looked like a man who had just seen the abyss open up at his feet. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew. And now so did Sarah. The girl he had mocked, the girl he had tried to crush to further his tough-on-crime reputation, the girl he had cavalierly tried to throw in a cage, was not just another faceless teenager. She was the daughter of Robert Washington, the 86th Attorney General of the United States, and Judge Arthur Harrington had just declared war on the most powerful lawman in the country. In the hours that followed the phone call, the Department of Justice did not descend on Fairfax County with sirens wailing. There were no dramatic press conferences, no public condemnations. Robert Washington was a man who understood power, and he knew that its most effective application was often silent, precise, and utterly overwhelming. He moved not like a hurricane, but like a glacier, slow, inexorable, and capable of grinding mountains to dust. His first call after hanging up with Maya had been to Benjamin Carter. "Ben, it's Robert." "Mr. Attorney General," Carter's smooth voice replied. "To what do I owe the honor?" "I'm calling as a father, Ben. My daughter Maya has been arrested in Fairfax. Framed. A judge named Harrington set bail at $250,000. There was a pause, and then Carter's voice turned to steel. "Give me the details." Robert laid it out quickly, dispassionately, a prosecutor presenting the facts of a case. The traffic stop, the planted drugs, the name of the arresting officer, the judge's behavior. When he was done, Carter simply said, "Consider it handled, Robert. My team is on it. We'll have her out before sunset." "Thank you, Ben," Robert said. "Send the bill to my private address. This is a personal matter." "There will be no bill," Carter stated flatly. "This is a professional courtesy and a pleasure." His second move was more subtle. He didn't pick up the phone and call the head of the Civil Rights Division himself. That would be a gross abuse of his office. Instead, he summoned his sharp, unflappable chief of staff, David Chen. "David," he said, his face an unreadable mask as he stared out his window at the Washington Monument. "I've received a credible, anonymous tip regarding potential patterns of judicial and police misconduct in Fairfax County, Virginia. Specifically, allegations of racially biased sentencing, excessive bail, and potential evidence tampering aimed at minority defendants." David Chen, a man who could read his boss's silences better than most people could read a book, didn't flinch. He simply took out a notepad. "Specific targets?" "The tip mentioned a Judge Arthur Harrington and an Officer Miller of the Fairfax County Police Department," Robert said, his voice even. "I believe the allegations are serious enough to warrant a preliminary inquiry by the Civil Rights Division. Quietly, no fanfare. I want a full statistical analysis of Harrington's sentencing patterns over the last 5 years. Compare his bail amounts and conviction rates for minority versus white defendants on similar charges. Dig into Officer Miller's arrest record. See if a pattern emerges." "Understood, sir," David said. He knew exactly what this was. The anonymous tip was a necessary fiction, a firewall to protect the integrity of the office. The Attorney General could not be seen to be using the power of the DOJ to settle a personal score, but he could act on information that came to his attention. And if that information happened to concern the very people who had wronged his daughter, that was simply a confluence of public duty and private justice. "And David," Robert added, turning from the window, "I want to know everything there is to know about Judge Arthur Harrington, his finances, his political ambitions, his friends, his enemies. Everything." Within the hour, the wheels were in motion. Benjamin Carter's legal team, a squad of brilliant, ruthless Ivy League lawyers who normally billed at $2,000 an hour, descended on the Fairfax courthouse. They moved with the quiet efficiency of a special forces unit, filing motions, demanding discovery, and putting the prosecutor's office on immediate notice that this would not be a typical plea bargain case. Maya was released into Sarah Jenkins's custody just as the sun was setting. The original charge still stood, a dark cloud on the horizon, but she was free. As she walked out of the courthouse, blinking in the evening light, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. A man in a tailored suit, one of Benjamin Carter's associates, stepped out. "Miss Washington, I'm here to take you home." Sarah Jenkins watched them go, a sense of awe mixing with her relief. In the space of a few hours, the entire dynamic had shifted. The lumbering, indifferent machine of the county justice system had run headlong into a silent, immovable wall of power. Judge Harrington, meanwhile, was in a state of escalating panic. His administrative error gambit had failed spectacularly. Releasing Maya on her own recognizance had not made the problem go away. It had only confirmed his fear. He spent the evening making frantic calls. The first was to the county's chief prosecutor. "Tom, it's Arthur. About the Washington girl. I think it would be wise to drop the charges. Lack of evidence." "Drop them?" Tom replied, confused. "The case is solid. Miller's report is ironclad. Why the sudden change of heart?" "Let's just say there are complicating factors," Harrington hedged. "Complicating factors? Arthur, you're the one who told me to make an example of her. You're running for that state Supreme Court seat on a tough on-crime platform. A high-profile narcotics conviction of a D.C. kid is exactly what your campaign needs. We already leaked the arrest to a friendly reporter at the local paper. Harrington felt a jolt of ice in his veins. You what? Just the basics. Promising students' future derailed by drugs. It'll be in tomorrow's morning edition. Great press for us. Harrington hung up the phone, his hand trembling. It was too late. The story was already out there. A small fire he had set that was now threatening to become an inferno. The narrative he wanted, crusading judge cleanse up the streets, was about to be flipped on its head. His next call was to Officer Miller. Miller, we have a problem, the judge said, his voice low and urgent. What kind of problem, Judge? Miller sounded confident, cocky even. He thought he was untouchable. The girl, the Washington girl, her father, he's someone important. Yeah? How important? A city councilman? A lobbyist? Miller scoffed. Harrington took a shaky breath. He's the Attorney General of the United States. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Miller's bravado evaporated, replaced by a cold, stark terror that Harrington knew intimately. You're kidding me, Miller finally whispered. I wish I were, Harrington said grimly. They've hired Benjamin Carter. The DOJ is sniffing around. Our story needs to be perfect. Your report, your testimony, every detail has to be locked down tight. There can be no mistakes. Judge, I did what you wanted, Miller stammered, his voice rising in panic. You said to be proactive. You said the numbers in this district were down. You said, I know what I said, Harrington hissed. And now I'm saying to keep your mouth shut and stick to the script. This isn't just about a conviction anymore. This is about our survival. He hung up and poured himself a large scotch, the amber liquid doing nothing to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He had built his entire career on a foundation of carefully managed image, backroom deals, and the intimidation of the powerless. He'd framed people before, railroaded defendants he deemed undesirable, always picking targets who couldn't fight back. It was a neat, dirty little system that had served him well. But this time, he hadn't just picked on an anonymous black girl. He had, with spectacular arrogance and catastrophic ignorance, tried to make an example of the daughter of the one man in the country who could unravel his entire corrupt world, thread by thread, without ever raising his voice. The puppeteer was now pulling the strings, and Judge Arthur Harrington was beginning to feel the tug of the noose. The article that appeared in the Fairfax Chronicle the next morning was exactly what Judge Harrington had feared. Under the headline, Georgetown-bound teen's bright future clouded by drug arrest, the story painted Maya as a tragic figure, another promising youth lost to crime. It quoted an anonymous source from the prosecutor's office praising Judge Harrington's unflinching commitment to keeping our streets safe. For a few hours, Harrington's base of supporters lauded him on social media. He was a hero, a man unafraid to enforce the law, regardless of the perpetrator's background. The narrative, however, began to fray before lunchtime. The first counterpunch came from Benjamin Carter's office, in the form of a statement to national news outlets. It was a masterpiece of controlled fury. My client, Maya Washington, is a brilliant and blameless young woman who was the victim of a malicious and targeted frame-up by elements within the Fairfax County justice system. The statement read, the notion that she is involved in narcotics is not only false, it is a disgusting slander. We have irrefutable evidence that the substances found in her vehicle were planted. We will not only prove her innocence in court, but we will also pursue every legal avenue to hold those responsible for this egregious violation of her civil rights accountable. This includes Judge Arthur Harrington, whose conduct on the bench was a disgrace to the judiciary. The story exploded. The involvement of Benjamin Carter in the direct named accusation against a sitting judge propelled it from a local crime blotter item to a national headline. U.S. Attorney General's daughter framed in Virginia? Screamed the cable news chyrons. The second blow was delivered by an investigative journalist named Chloe Sanders. Sanders worked for ProPublica and had a reputation for dismantling corrupt systems with meticulous, fact-based reporting. She had received an anonymous email sent from a scrambled server by David Chen containing a data set of Judge Harrington's rulings from the past 5 years. Chloe spent the next 48 hours in a caffeine-fueled haze, cross-referencing the data, pulling court records, and building a damning mosaic of Harrington's judicial philosophy. The pattern was undeniable and ugly. For identical nonviolent, first-time drug offenses, white defendants under 25 were, 85% of the time, offered plea deals that resulted in misdemeanors, probation, and expungible records. Black and Latino defendants under 25 were, 92% of the time, pushed to trial or given plea deals for felonies, resulting in prison time and permanent criminal records. The average bail set by Harrington for a white defendant in these cases was $5,000. For a minority defendant, it was $75,000. Maya's $250,000 bail was an outlier only in its sheer audacity. Chloe then started making calls. She reached out to Sarah Jenkins, who, now backed by the full resources of Benjamin Carter's firm, was more than willing to talk. Sarah provided context, stories, and the names of former clients who had been chewed up and spit out by Harrington's court. Chloe's next call was to one of those former clients, a young man named Leo Martinez. He had been a promising mechanic's apprentice 3 years earlier when he was pulled over for a broken taillight. Officer Miller was the arresting officer. A small amount of marijuana, which Leo swore wasn't his, was found under his seat. Judge Harrington had sentenced him to 2 years, scoffing at his pleas of innocence. Leo lost his apprenticeship, his apartment, and his future. That judge, he looked at me like I was garbage, Leo told Chloe, his voice thick with a still raw pain. He didn't see a person. He just saw another name to check off a list. He ruined my life. Chloe found a dozen more stories just like Leo's. A web of ruined lives, all leading back to the same courtroom and often to the same arresting officer. Miller. The pressure on Officer Miller was becoming unbearable. Internally, the Fairfax PD had opened an investigation, but it was a cursory, protect-their-own affair. The real pressure was external. His face was now plastered all over the news. Reporters camped outside his house. Benjamin Carter's legal team had subpoenaed his service record, his finances, and every arrest report he'd filed in the last decade. They were looking for a crack, and Miller knew his own facade was made of glass. He was a man drowning in debt, a messy divorce, a gambling habit. He needed money, and he needed to look good to get promoted. Judge Harrington had been his ticket. The judge had made it clear in a series of off-the-record chats that officers who brought him quality arrests, meaning easy convictions against defendants who couldn't fight back, would be remembered and rewarded. It was an unspoken pact. Miller provided the arrests, and Harrington provided the convictions that bolstered his political platform. In return, the judge had helped Miller with a loan from a friend to cover a particularly nasty gambling debt. It was a chain of mutual corruption. One evening, Sarah Jenkins, acting on a hunch, approached Miller as he left the police station. She didn't come as a threat, but as an offer of a lifeline. "Officer Miller," she said, her tone even, "you don't have to go down with him." Miller flinched, looking around nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Sarah said softly. "You're a decorated officer. You served your country. This isn't who you are. Harrington is using you. He needed a stat, so he told you to get him one, and you picked the wrong car. And when this all blows up, who do you think is going to prison? The wealthy, powerful judge with all the political connections, or the cop on the street with a mountain of debt?" She let the words hang in the air. Benjamin Carter's office is prosecuting the civil rights case, but the DOJ is building a criminal one. They don't have you on tape talking to the judge, but they will have his bank records. They'll find the loan. They'll call it bribery, and they will bury you under the jail. She paused, then delivered the final calculated line. "But the first one to talk always gets the best deal. You have a choice, Officer Miller. You can be a co-conspirator, or you can be the star witness for the United States government. Think about it." She turned and walked away, leaving Miller standing in the parking lot, the foundations of his world crumbling around him. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had planted the pills in Maya's car, and realized they were shaking. Sarah Jenkins was right. Harrington would feed him to the wolves without a second thought to save himself. His loyalty was to no one but himself. The choice was simple: his life or the judge's. That night, Officer Miller made a phone call, not to Judge Harrington, but to the number Sarah Jenkins had slipped him, the direct line to the lead prosecutor in the DOJ's Public Integrity Section. The first crack in the facade had just become a gaping chasm. The collapse of Judge Arthur Harrington's world was not a sudden explosion, but a meticulously engineered demolition. The first charge to be detonated was the case against Maya Washington. At a preliminary hearing, Benjamin Carter didn't just ask for a dismissal. He staged a public execution of the prosecution's case. He presented sworn affidavits from two of Jessica's neighbors, elderly birdwatchers who had seen Maya's car parked outside her friend's house for 4 hours, untouched before she left. He presented security camera footage from a gas station 2 blocks from the traffic stop, time-stamped just 3 minutes before the pullover, showing Maya's car driving perfectly within its lane. Then came the star witness. When the prosecutor called Officer Miller to the stand to testify about the arrest, Miller walked to the stand, took the oath, and looked not at the prosecutor, but directly at the DOJ attorneys seated in the gallery. "I wish to retract my previous statement and police report," Miller said, his voice shaking but clear. "The evidence against Miss Washington was planted. I placed the baggie of pills in her center console at the scene." A tidal wave of shock rolled through the courtroom. The county prosecutor's face went slack with disbelief. Judge Harrington, who was presiding over a different case in the adjacent courtroom, could reportedly hear the commotion. Miller continued, now reading from a prepared statement provided by his new federal attorney. "I did so under implicit and explicit pressure from Judge Arthur Harrington, who for years has fostered a culture of prosecutorial misconduct in this county. He rewarded officers who brought him easy convictions against minority defendants and punished those who did not. My actions were illegal and inexcusable, and I am here to cooperate fully with the federal investigation into Judge Harrington's corruption." The county prosecutor, pale and sweating, immediately stood and withdrew all charges against Maya Washington. The judge on the bench, a colleague of Harrington's, looked horrified and quickly slammed his gavel. "Case dismissed with prejudice." Maya, sitting between her father and Benjamin Carter, let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. It was over. Her name was cleared. Robert Washington wrapped a powerful arm around her, his own eyes glistening, but it was far from over for Judge Harrington. 2 days later, Chloe Sanders published her exposé on ProPublica. It was a journalistic kill shot, titled "The King of Fairfax County." The 10,000-word article laid bare Harrington's entire corrupt enterprise. It had the data, the patterns of racist sentencing, the heartbreaking stories of victims like Leo Martinez, and the explosive on-the-record confirmation from Officer Miller's lawyer about the judge's scheme. The story detailed the loans Harrington facilitated for compliant officers, tracing the money back to a slush fund controlled by a wealthy real estate developer who had received several suspiciously favorable zoning rulings from Harrington's court. The story went viral, picked up by every major news network. The State Judicial Review Board immediately suspended Harrington pending a full investigation. The political party backing his state Supreme Court bid dropped him like a stone, issuing a statement condemning his appalling and unethical behavior. His entire life, built on a carefully curated image of integrity, was publicly incinerated in less than 24 hours. The final act came on a crisp autumn morning a week later. As Judge Arthur Harrington, now stripped of his title, walked out of his stately brick home, he was met not by his driver, but by 2 grim-faced agents from the FBI. "Arthur Harrington," the lead agent said, holding up a badge, "you are under arrest." The charges were read aloud as they cuffed him on his perfectly manicured lawn, in full view of the news cameras that had, as if by magic, appeared at the end of his street. Conspiracy to deprive persons of rights under color of law, bribery, obstruction of justice. The list went on. His perp walk was brutal. The man who had smirked down from his bench, who had wielded his power with such casual cruelty, now looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. His silver hair was a mess, his expensive suit rumpled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed terror of a man who knows he has been completely and irrevocably defeated. He had tried to take Maya's future, and in doing so had forfeited his own. The karma was swift and hard. Facing an ironclad case built on Miller's testimony, bank records, and the accounts of dozens of other victims, Arthur Harrington took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a place where his former title would earn him no respect, only scorn. He was disbarred and forced to pay millions in restitution to a victim's compensation fund. Officer Miller, in exchange for his testimony, pleaded guilty to perjury and planting evidence. He was sentenced to 3 years in a low-security facility and would never wear a badge again. The Fairfax County justice system was thrown into chaos. Harrington's cases were reviewed, leading to several overturned convictions, including that of Leo Martinez, who received a formal apology from the state and a substantial settlement from the victim's fund. Sarah Jenkins, no longer a weary public defender, used the notoriety of the case to partner with the ACLU and start the Harrington Project, a nonprofit dedicated to fighting judicial misconduct and aiding the wrongfully convicted in Virginia. Maya Washington, her name and future restored, did not let the experience break her. It forged her. She went to Georgetown, but she changed her major from political science to law. She spent her summers interning for Benjamin Carter, learning from the man who had helped save her. She became a passionate, eloquent advocate for criminal justice reform, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Robert Washington never spoke publicly about his daughter's ordeal. He didn't have to. His actions had spoken for him. He had used the vast power of his office not for personal revenge, but to cleanse a rot within the system he was sworn to uphold. He had shown that true justice is not about vengeance, but about restoration and accountability. He had done what any loving father would do. He had protected his child. He just happened to have the entire weight of the United States Department of Justice to help him do it. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a corrupt judge getting his comeuppance. It's a stark reminder of how fragile our freedoms are and how easily power can be abused when it goes unchecked. Maya Washington's story had a just ending because of her father's unique position, but how many others, like Leo Martinez, suffer in silence? How many futures are destroyed by a biased glance, a planted piece of evidence, or a judge who values statistics over humanity? This story, while dramatic, reflects a real-life battle being fought every day in courtrooms across the country. It's a fight for the very soul of the justice system. If Maya's ordeal has moved you, if you believe that no one should be above the law, please give this video a like and share it to spread awareness. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth and fight for a more just world. Thank you for listening.